Hello and welcome to the new season of the Drawn and Redrawn, the Making of India's Internal Boundaries podcast. This is a part of a larger India State Stories project that explores the evolution of India's political and administrative boundaries. This project is an undertaking by the Centre for Legislative Education and Research at Flame University in Pune. In this new season, we embark on a journey through the fascinating histories and narratives of each Indian state and union territories, exploring the pivotal events, influential personalities, and societal transformations that have shaped the subcontinent. In this fifth episode, we learn about the interesting history behind the formation of State of Bihar. This episode is based on a corresponding article written by our team at India State Stories. These articles have been converted to audio conversations with the help of Google's Notebook LM. You can find the relevant article link in the show notes. Now, let's dive into the conversation.
It is good to be back, and today we are tackling a real heavyweight, a region that, dominates so much the political conversation in India, but is often, reduced to a bit of a caricature in popular media. We're talking about Bihar.
It's so interesting you say caricature, because when you look at the map of Bihar today, it just looks so solid, so permanent. But going through the research for this deep dive, the thing that really struck me is how fluid this region actually is.
That's it.
It's not this static shape. It's a region with a really distinct modern political consciousness that seems to predate the country's independence itself.
That is the perfect place to start. If you want to visualize Bihar's history on a map, don't picture a photograph. Picture like a sketch pad.
Yeah.
It's constantly being drawn, erased, redrawn. We go from this massive imperial presidency to a standalone province, then it gets bifurcated, and then sliced up again. It is, you could argue it's the most edited map in Indian history.
So our mission today is to trace those edits. We need to figure out how Bihar went from being just a slice of Bengal to the state we see today.
And the why.
Exactly. I want to get to the why, because it seems like it wasn't just random administrative shuffling. There were deep issues of, language, tribal identity, and some really controversial economic policies involved.
Exactly. To understand the Bihar of 2024, you really have to understand the Bihar of 1912.
So let's go back to the colonial era. Before 1912, Bihar, as a political entity, it didn't really exist, right? It was just part of the Bengal presidency.
Correct. And we need to define Bengal presidency here because it wasn't just West Bengal as we know it. After the Battle of Buxar in 1764, the British consolidated this massive administrative unit.
How massive are we talking?
Well, it included present-day Bangladesh, West Bengal, Bihar, Orissa, and even parts of the Northeast. It was a super state.
That sounds like an administrative nightmare.
Well, for the British, it was efficient, but for the people living in the Bihar region, it was stifling. You have to imagine the power dynamics. The capital was Calcutta.
Right.
The intelligentsia was Bengali. The bureaucracy was predominantly Bengali.
So if you were a Bihari, you were essentially a second-class citizen in your own province.
You were on the periphery. This is what the sources call the Bengal-centric governance model. There was this palpable sense of dissatisfaction, a feeling that the specific cultural needs and the economic development of the Hindi-speaking heartland were playing second fiddle to the coast.
And this wasn't just people grumbling in coffee houses. This actually turned into a movement.
A very vocal one.
Yeah.
And it worked. On March 2010, 1912, the British finally gave in. They carved out the Bihar and Orissa provinces.
And crucially, they named Patna the capital.
Yes, that must have been a massive psychological win. It's like reclaiming Pataliputra, essentially.
Huge. It marked the birth of that modern political consciousness we mentioned.
And here's the twist. The British didn't really get the lines right the first time. They just lumped Bihar and Orissa together.
Which seems odd. The languages are completely different.
It was an administrative marriage of convenience, but it didn't last. And this leads us to April 1st, 1936. This is a date that I think is really underappreciated in Indian history.
This is the second split, right?
Yeah.
Where Bihar and Orissa finally separate.
Yes. Under the leadership of Muhammad Yunus, Bihar becomes its own distinct province. But look at why they split. It was purely on linguistic lines.
Wait, let me just pause you there. 1936? I always thought the whole linguistic state movement, reorganizing India based on language, was a post-independence drama.
That's what everyone thinks.
Yeah, the 1950s, people fasting unto death, burning buses, that sort of thing.
That is the common narrative. But Bihar was actually the trendsetter. They were demanding and getting borders based on language decades before the rest of the country caught up.
So they were ahead of the curve.
Way ahead. The 1936 map of Bihar gave us a structure that is remarkably close to what we see today. They basically proved that language was the most natural way to organize a diverse subcontinent.
So by the time 1947 rolls around and the British are packing their bags, Bihar is already standing on its own 2 feet as this distinct linguistic entity. But then independence happens, and suddenly the map gets messy again because of the princely states.
The integration of the princely states is always the chaotic chapter, isn't it?
Oh.
You have all these small, semi-autonomous kingdoms that suddenly need to be absorbed into the democratic framework. And in 1948, just a year after freedom, Bihar's borders had to expand to swallow these entities.
The notes mention 2 specific states that caused a bit of a headache. Kharsawan and Saraikela. Now, historically, these were Orissa tributary states. So logic and geography would suggest they go to Orissa.
You would think so.
But they ended up in Bihar. How did that happen?
It was a classic clash between administrative history and cultural reality. Yes, the rulers had ties to Orissa, but the people on the ground, they were largely non-Oriya speakers. They were culturally much, much closer to the tribal belt of southern Bihar, the Chotanagpur Plateau.
So the government prioritized the people's culture over the ruler's history.
In this case, yes. The logic was to keep those cultural affinities intact.
It wasn't just those 2, though. I have a list here of the non-salute states that were folded in. I'm just going to rattle these off to give you a sense of the fragmentation. Ready?
Go.
Marampur, Darbhanga, Ramgarh, Ranka, Jagdishpur, Dumraon, Dingwara, Tajpur, Banaili, Kara, Baur, and Chinur.
Quite the laundry list.
It just sounds like a logistical nightmare. Imagine changing the letterheads for all those places.
It was complex, but the sources emphasized that it was surprisingly peaceful. This really aligned with Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel's vision for integration. Unlike Hyderabad or Kashmir, there was no military action needed here. It was a smooth absorption.
But the ink wasn't dry yet. We have to talk about the big one. The States Reorganization Commission, the SRC of 1953. This was the moment the whole map of India was put on the operating table.
Exactly. Now, in 1953, everyone had a wish list. Bihar and its neighbors were all throwing claims at the SRC. There were already early rumbles about a separate Jharkhand state and arguments about border districts with West Bengal.
And what did the commission say?
They essentially said no to almost everything. They rejected the demand for a separate Jharkhand state at that time, saying the region wasn't viable on its own. But they made one major exception.
The Purulia question.
Yes. In 1956, following the States Reorganization Act, the district of Purulia was surgically removed from Bihar and grafted onto West Bengal.
Why Purulia? If they ignored all the other demands, why did this one stick?
We are back to language. Purulia had the highest concentration of Bengali speakers outside of West Bengal. The SRC just felt that for developmental reasons, schools, courts, administration, these people would be better served by a government in Kolkata than one in Patna.
So Bihar loses a chunk of territory to the east. But while the borders were shifting externally, something much more dangerous was happening internally. This brings us to the economic paradox.
This is, I think, the most critical part of the deep dive.
I read this section 3 times because I couldn't believe it. We need to talk about the freight equalization policy of 1952.
It sounds so boring, doesn't it? Freight equalization. It sounds like bureaucratic housekeeping, but it single-handedly broke the back of Bihar's economy.
Okay, explain it like I'm 5. Because on the surface, making freight prices equal sounds, well, fair.
It sounds fair, but here is the reality. Bihar, especially the southern part, was sitting on a gold mine, or rather, a coal mine. Massive reserves of coal and iron ore. In a free market, where do you build a steel factory?
You build it right next to the mine. Because rocks are heavy, you don't want to pay to ship them halfway across the country.
Exactly. Low transport costs are your competitive advantage. It's why Pittsburgh became Pittsburgh. But the Indian government, in an attempt to industrialize the whole country, decided to subsidize the transport of these minerals.
So they made it so that buying coal in Bihar cost the same as buying coal in Mumbai or Chennai.
Precisely. They eliminated the cost of distance.
Oh, so if I'm a factory owner and the raw material costs the same everywhere, why would I build in the hinterland of Bihar with poor infrastructure? I'd build near the ports.
And that is exactly what happened. The factories went to the coast. Bihar became an extraction economy. The minerals were dug up and taken out, but the value, the jobs, the factories, the wealth was created elsewhere.
That is just devastating. It's essentially a resource curse, but engineered by policy.
It stripped Bihar of its one massive geographic advantage, and you can imagine how this played into the tribal politics we touched on earlier.
I can imagine. If you are a tribal living in southern Bihar, you are watching your land get dug up, you're getting displaced by mines, but you aren't seeing any of the money or the jobs.
It was the perfect recipe for resentment. The tribal population, the Santhals, Mundas, Oranons, Hos, they already felt culturally distinct. Now they felt economically exploited. They felt they had zero political voice in Patna.
This is where the movement for Jharkhand really finds its legs.
Yeah.
And the sources introduce us to a fascinating character here, Japal Singh Munda.
A legend, a complete legend.
I had to double-check this fact. He captained India to a gold medal at the 1928 Olympics in field hockey.
He did, an Oxford-educated tribal leader who was also an Olympic champion.
Talk about a resume.
He was the first one to really articulate these grievances on the national stage. He formed the Adivasi Mahasabha in 1938. He argued that the tribals were the original inhabitants and deserved autonomy.
The movement had its peaks and valleys, though, right? It seemed to fade a bit in the 60s.
It fractured due to internal politics, but it came back roaring in the 70s and 80s. This time, it was led by the Jharkhand Mukti Morcha, the JMM, under Shibu Soren. They were more militant, more organized.
And by the late 80s, the writing was on the wall.
It was. Even national parties like the BJP started supporting a separate state.
Although the BJP wanted to call it Eventual, right? Forest land.
Yes, they preferred a Sanskritized name. But whether you called it Eventual or Jharkhand, the goal was the same: separation from Bihar.
And that brings us to the year 2000, the millennium, and the final massive surgery on the map of Bihar.
November 15th, 2000. The date was chosen very carefully. It was the birth anniversary of Birsa Munda, the iconic 19th century freedom fighter.
So symbolism was heavy, but practically, 18 districts were carved out. Just like that, 46% of the land area was gone.
And more importantly, the engine room was gone.
Right. Because all those mines, all those few industries that did exist, despite the freight policy, Jamshedpur, Bokaro, Dhambad, they were all in the south.
Overnight, Bihar went from being a mineral-rich state to a mineral-poor state. The new state of Jharkhand walked away with the coal, the iron, and the industrial revenue.
It's almost like a divorce where one partner keeps the house and the bank account, and the other partner just gets the garden.
The garden and the people. Bihar was left with very fertile agricultural land and a massive population. But the industrial base was, it was zero.
So how did the state react?
It was a period of mourning for many in Bihar. There was a genuine identity crisis. Who are we if we aren't the resource hub? They had to completely reimagine their entire economy.
But governance didn't stop. The transcript mentions that even before this split, the internal map was always changing.
Oh yeah, from 1951 all the way to 2021, the state has been carving out new districts like the major reorganization in 1972. The goal has always been to make the administrative units smaller so the government can actually reach the people.
So here we are today. We see the result of all these subtractions. We've lost the coast, we've lost the mines. But a state is more than just its GDP figures. We have to talk about the legacy.
You absolutely cannot tell the story of India without Bihar. It is the soul of the civilization in so many ways.
Nalanda and Vikramashila.
Just think about what those were. 1,000 years ago, these were global centers of learning. Students were coming from China, Korea, Central Asia to study in Bihar. That intellectual DNA is very, very deep.
And it carried right through to the modern era. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the first president of Bihari, Jayaprakash Narayan, JP, the man who essentially saved Indian democracy in the 70s.
Absolutely. The political consciousness we talked about at the start. It produces leaders who don't just shape the state, they shape the nation.
But we have to be realistic about the present. What is the status report today, 2 decades after the big split?
It's a mixed bag. It really is. Since the 2000 bifurcation, there has been undeniable progress. The sources highlight significant jumps in literacy rates, electrification is almost universal now, and rural road connectivity has transformed the villages.
But the challenges are massive.
They are. Migration is the big one. Because there's no industry, millions of young Biharis have to leave. They go to Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore to work, often in low-paying jobs. The state exports labor because it can't import capital.
And the sources mentioned corruption and social inequality are still significant hurdles.
It's a state playing catch-up, is
Yeah.
trying to rebuild a house after half the foundation was taken away.
It really is a story of resilience, from being a marginalized corner of the Bengal presidency to pioneering linguistic states to being hollowed out by economic policy and now trying to pivot.
It's a journey of constant reinvention.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the big takeaway? We've traced the lines, but where is it pointing?
I think there is a provocative thought here about the future of economies. We usually look at the loss of Kirkhan's minerals as a tragedy for Bihar. And historically, it was. But look at the world today.
We're moving away from coal. We're moving away from heavy extraction.
Exactly. The global economy is shifting from extraction to knowledge and services. Bihar was forced painfully to transition to an economy based on people. If the state can solve the education crisis, if it can harness that human potential, is it possible that this forced evolution actually positions it better for the 21st century than the resource-heavy states?
That's a fascinating pivot. Maybe the resource curse is finally over and the human resource era begins.
It is the big if, but it's a possibility.
Definitely something to chew on. Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive into the making of Bihar.
It's been a pleasure exploring this history.
Thank you all for listening. Don't forget to check the show notes for the original article from India's State Stories if you want to dig even deeper into the data. We'll catch you on the next one.